I believe that the reason that Kronos gave was insincere. That is my personal belief.
Right.
They're getting money on top of buying these bits. They're essentially getting bribed to do this. So to me, that's illicit. To me, that should absolutely be a bannable offense. But Twitch is not going to enforce it.
Recently, I posted a video talking about Pirate Software seeming to collude with his lead moderator Kronos to inflate and extend the duration of his hype train. Now, if you'd like more info on this situation, here's a link to said video. But to continue on, I had told you guys that I would potentially be speaking with a lawyer, as well as the fact that I'd reached out to someone that was working with Twitch. Now, that lead ended up falling short with the person working at Twitch, but I got very lucky and ended up running into someone who had worked at Twitch for 8 years and actually had expertise with the terms of service. Their name here is Eludiana, and they were also an ex-Blizzard employee as well as ex-Twitch. And now what's even more interesting is they actually were working with Pirate Software when he worked at Blizzard. Matter of fact, she was his kind of higher up, but not only that, she was also an ex-roommate of his, and she has a lot to talk about. Now, for the sake of you guys, the viewers, I wanted to break this down. So in this video, we're specifically going to be going over the Twitch terms of service breakages. So that's what's going to be in the contents of this video. And then I'll be releasing a secondary video to go over her experiences with him as a roommate, as well as working with him. And you'll get to hear about how he would choose not to do his job and instead would browse Reddit. Yeah, last 10 seconds before we jump in, consider subscribing, really helps out the channel and it's just a click for you guys. And like the video if you end up finding the information useful, want to help boost it in the algorithm, it really does help me a great deal. But with all that being said, hope you enjoyed the video and enjoyed the interview. So let's kind of shift our focus over to talking about the more recent stuff. A recent video that I had done had kind of brought to light that there was some exchange DMs between Pirate Software and his lead moderator Kronos that are kind of, I would say, clearly implying that they were kind of working together. Matter of fact, even with the previous messages that Kronos showed, one of which is edited, and apparently he's just not available right now, but in the next few days I should be able to see when he edited that message. But regardless, this hype train was kept alive by, at the very least, from what we see here, Kronos. And I went through in that video and did quite a hefty amount of speculation, and where that specifically there was part of that with the terms of service, and that is kind of a bit of why we got in touch. If you could, so what is your experience with Twitch, the terms of service, things like that?
Okay, this is the fun part. So I was the sole UX writer for Twitch. What that means is I touched every department at Twitch. That includes things like terms of service enforcement. That includes all of the contracts. I dealt a lot with trying to convince a lot of the teams that they needed to be more explicit with their terms. And a lot of the time they weren't, because they wanted to be as concise as possible, which makes sense because, users don't want to read anything. Like, that is just a thing. So we have to have an understanding in the terms of service that things need to be taken more or less literally. When we're speaking on terms of inflating numbers, we mean things like view counts. It means the actual functional numbers that would actually matter for metrics. Like, it has nothing to do with things like donations, like
Or a
bit
hype train
counts,
level.
or a hype train level.
Okay.
Like, it should not have anything to do with that, because hype train is one of those very pay to win systems. If
Right.
you can pay to win, you pay to win. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Okay.
Now, there is something to be said about if Pirate himself was using an alt account to inflate the numbers, that could potentially be an argument. But if it was his mods, it is not unusual for mods themselves to contribute to hype trains. So if they could do that in the first place, they are more than welcome to sustain the hype train.
So it's not typical for a mod to go out of their way to create an alternate account to do this thing.
Yeah, there are, and I don't want to say this is normal. Like,
Sure.
this is not something that everybody does. However, something that some people will elect to do, especially if they want to protect their privacy. You'll see this with, let's say, e-girls. All right, like, people will create alt accounts to give huge donations to certain accounts that they don't necessarily want to have attention drawn to their mains with, whatever their reasoning may be behind it. I believe that the reason that Kronos gave was insincere. That is my personal belief.
I actually agree with you, and the reason
Yeah.
that I agree with you is because 100 tier 1 subs had already been donated by his main account, which he said as much
Yes.
about.
And also, if you're creating an alternate account, you do not say, "This is my alternate account."
Which, yeah, he's a grown ass man. He can do what he wants with his money. I don't think I've ever heard of a grown ass man receiving a paycheck and then taking part of that check and handing it back to his boss. But I
Yeah.
digress. That's just a goofy, funny little thing.
It's
When
a
we're
goofy thing, and honestly, if he wanted to lie about it, he could say, "I wanted the emote on 2 accounts."
Yeah, there
Better
are
liar.
so many better excuses. Yeah. Okay, so
Mhm.
this was the first main point that I had brought up. And so the reason that I was looking at this specific point here was the selling offering to sell, trading, bartering, or transferring bits to other users to Twitch in exchange for a real or virtual currency. Now, the reason I use this is because, and I actually didn't know this at the time, but the assumption was based on the the verbiage that they used in their discussion. It implied that they were trying to get the best return for the streamer, which would end
Mhm.
up being better for Kronos when it turned. Now, I did just find out recently that it was established for that hype train that the moderators were going to be receiving half of that hype train's proceeds.
Oh my god.
That was announced publicly. Matter of fact, it's on the Discord. I now have access and screenshots of that message. And so
Mhm.
Kronos, alongside the other moderators, knew full well that they would be receiving half the money that was being sent here. So now that 80% share makes a lot more sense that they were discussing it, because that meant that they were going to get more money back after giving it to the hype train.
Yeah, but those returns actually I think are with respect to the transaction value of bits because there's an exchange rate. The return on the actual purchase of bits versus what the streamer gets because the streamer gets 100% of the bits when they're directly donated. The difference is if they're donated through an extension, which I think they were talking about extensions. If they're donated like through the soundboards and things like that,
Sure.
then the extension maker obtains a portion of
Is
that.
that the 20% or the 18%,
That's
82%?
that's whichever percent. I can't remember exactly the percent, but that's where the extra cut comes from. Otherwise, the bits are a one-to-one donation. So if you donate 100 bits after purchase to a streamer, they get 100 bits. Period.
Interesting. Okay,
Because
so
you've already paid that transaction fee.
that makes sense. So then in turn, well, I think we can then chalk that up. So the reason that the bit percentage that they were talking about was brought up is because they were using text to speech. Would that have been a
I
third party?
believe so.
Okay.
But then for the other terms here, if you want me to explain these,
Yes,
like
please.
the real or virtual currencies, this pertains to something like Robux. That's real or virtual currencies, like any of those virtual currencies.
So like
WoW
giving bits
Gold.
to a creator in exchange for Robux.
You're giving me bits for WoW Gold. Can't
Okay.
do that.
Again, so the main reason that I was focusing on is like for that real currency. So I would say what you're arguing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that even though Kronos at this point understood that he would be getting a return of the money that was donated through the hype train, whether it be through bits, donations, etc., subs, even with him knowing that fact and then donating to the stream in his head, or the way that he's understanding it, or maybe that pirate, or just for the hypothetical, they know that they are donating these bits, and in return they're going to be receiving half of the funds that come back, or as that's dispersed among the moderators. Even with that kind of like thought process, that doesn't change the fact that at a fundamental level on the Twitch service, it was not a direct exchange for finances.
That's what I'm worried about. Like that's
Okay.
the way that Twitch should enforce it, but that's not how this is written.
Okay.
That's the messed up thing about the terms of service. These are the things that I was constantly fighting while I was at the company because they need to be more explicit about this. Because yes, they are making these bits donations in lieu of a payout later on. Like they know they're going to get paid back and not just reimbursed. They're getting a paycheck for this work.
Right.
They're getting money on top of buying these bits. They're essentially getting bribed to do this. So to me, that's illicit. To me, that should absolutely be a bannable offense. But Twitch is not going to enforce it because they were not using bits to exchange directly for money.
Even if this is like, okay, well, we'll work around the rule. There's no, well, we're not planning to go forward and like edit the rule to make it more specific because they prefer conciseness over
They
coveringness.
didn't send 10,000 bits for an Apple gift card.
That's
It's
all
messed
this is planned to cover.
It is seriously messed up. Yeah.
Okay, well,
I
totally fair.
genuinely hope that I am wrong. The way that this is written and the way that this has been enforced, unless there is an actual transaction taking place, there is no way that this would be enforceable.
Okay.
It really does suck because I completely agree with you. That is how it should be enforced. There was collusion. There was a payout here.
Yes,
Yeah.
the thing that makes it worse for me isn't that that is happening. It's just how that ends up incentivizing a viewer, someone that is potentially willing to donate, how that impacts their psyche when it goes into, do I donate to this person? Because
Yeah.
that is just like, even with me when I was starting out my channel, it is enticing to pump my numbers up, whether it be through ads, whether it be through like any sort of type of viewership. Because when you approach a number where, like, for subscribers, you hit 100K, you have a check mark next to your name. You have 100,000 views on a video that's gone out in a couple hours.
Yeah.
People are more incentivized to click on it because of that, you know, appealing to the popularity of something.
Yeah.
There's kind of like a guaranteed buy-in that people understand, oh, this person's reputable, and you can see that proof by other people being willing to follow, listen, donate, etc.
Yeah, not only that, but oh, does this mean that we can bot hype trains now to keep them going in perpetuity?
And then they also are rewarded. The viewers are rewarded with the Cap Infinite emote, with other
Yeah.
rewards along the way. And now there's also a popular, like, he got a news article when he broke the 106
Yeah.
world record. There's a lot to gain by also stimulating this. Good to hear that from someone who has that experience with Twitch.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's not just
Oh,
on the
no,
side.
we're on the same page. Like, I regularly raged at this company. I was one of the few people who is actually embedded in streaming. Like, I was one of the few people who was a moderator for heavier partners and also a regular streamer on the platform. And it's things like this where, like, you need to clearly outline what is going on here. Like, what do these terms mean? Because people are going to exploit the system.
The engage in viewership tampering, and then you say such as. So the way that I read that is those are examples and not fully encompassing the entirety of what that plans to cover. Because again, from my perspective, when I was first reading it, I was going broad. And so in my head, when I see viewership inflation, that for me also at that time included a hype train's level, because you would assume the assumption is those are the viewers that are donating in, and that isn't the moderators, that isn't, you know, working
I
together to
wish.
do that.
I wish. Part of viewership tampering is anything that can play into your stream analytics. So we're talking things like chat activity. Like that is another metric that can be tampered with.
Is
It
revenue from
isn't
donations not considered?
no, because it's not viewership.
Interesting.
That's just straight revenue. Yeah.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the main reason that it's super focused, it has nothing to do with revenue. So even like a hype train level, is like we were kind of looking at, I think that was more from a consumer perspective. It sounds like the reason we're so focused on the viewership counts is because that's coming from a
Viewership cares
brand.
because ad revenue.
Yes. So that's going to look bad, and that's going to end up with Twitch losing money if they don't enforce, like, you know, making sure people aren't botting views, because then those aren't actual returns on advertisers.
This can make Twitch lose their own monetization from advertisers. This can make them lose ad partners.
That makes sense. In 10.2 here, this is against the terms of service, and you will not impersonate any person or entity, falsely claim an affiliation with any person or entity, access the Twitch services accounts of others without permission, etc., etc., misrepresent the source, identity, or content of information transmitted via the Twitch services, or perform any other similar fraudulent activity. So my perspective on this, my understanding, the reason that I had brought this up is because Kronos, who I would consider at this point a public figure, because of he has his own socials, he is the lead moderator for Pirate. It was their stream, so I think for all points considered, the viewership of that treats him as a public figure as well. He had an alternate account that he misrepresented as someone who knew Kronos, who spoke highly of Pirate as if, you know, they were a viewer and they donated in that sense. And so technically, yes, it is a false affiliation with Kronos, because this is Kronos himself. He faked having a friend. But the more, you know, that's funny. But the more specific thing, right, was the misrepresenting the source, identity, or content of information transmitted via the Twitch services. He misrepresented, he faked being somebody else.
Yeah, and sadly, this tends to only work the opposite direction. So lying upward is what you get in trouble for. Lying downward, you do not get in trouble for. And they see that as trying to protect your real identity. So it's not hiding who you are because I'm a moderator and I can't let people know I'm a moderator. They see that as, yes, you want to not have people know that you're a moderator because then they might try to cause problems because you're a moderator.
They're not looking at it as I'm obfuscating where this money is coming from to keep this hype train alive. Because again, this is also, admittedly, this is a niche thing in comparison to Twitch's like general audience, but they're more specifically focused on some people don't want their identity, and that typically, and so I mean, the rule is in place not to avoid potential fraudulent activity by pretending to be somebody else. It is to obfuscate, to protect the identities of people who don't want to be harassed.
Yeah, the fraud would be like if he was posing as Asmongold and saying,
Right.
I am
It's
making
like
donuts.
co-signing a crypto and putting a big name behind it. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
And I mean this. Thank you, because these are corrections to the arguments that I made, but more than that, it's very good to know that like a bit of an understanding of the intentions of these TOS guidelines as opposed to how I interpreted them based on the situation. It's cool to know that that's where they're coming from, and it makes more sense given the context.
Yeah, and honestly, like, this is how they are supposed to be interpreted because this is how they were written to be understood.
As a side note, you said that you wanted to show me a bit of proof that you two were working together. Do you have that
Yes.
with you?
Oh, yes, I do. So this is an interesting artifact. This was the Platform Services yearbook that they did
Okay.
one year. This was 2013. And let's
2013.
see
There
what
it
it
is. Okay.
I'm not sure how many of these they produced because they were rather expensive, but this is us right there.
Okay. And so we've got, and it's kind of grainy. Would you be able to send me a photo of it too? And I could probably just
Yes,
throw it up on the screen as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
But yeah, you're
And
right next to each other. You're both halls.
we're right there. We're both Halls, hence the presumed siblingness, I guess. But his title there is Associate Test Engineer.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time like going over this. Like truly, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the time.
So to my complete and utter dismay, I was wrong about every single Twitch terms of service. Where I thought it could be broken, it ends up being that the reason that those were written the way that they were was for a completely different reason. And honestly, I kind of expected that I'd at least be wrong on a couple of them, but maybe I guess not all of them. But it's good to know why these terms of service were written the way they were. Moreover, why there probably isn't going to be any consequences sent pirates' way from Twitch. I mean, at the end of the day, their bottom dollar isn't being impacted by this more than it's actually being a positive for them. They're making more money by allowing this kind of behavior. And from how I understand it, Twitch is still working at a loss. So any way that they can make money, they're going to do it, and they're probably not going to address this. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed this segment of the interview. Look for more coming in the future here, and I'll see you guys later. Adios. Peace. Bye.